Ahead and start. Why don't we open with the word of prayer? Nathan, would you word us a prayer?
Dear Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you that we were able to meet tonight. I want to pray for this time. I just want to pray that everything we talk about will be super productive and just good towards your kingdom and good in all of our personal lives. I want to pray that all of us would be able to, learn more from your word because of this class. It's in your heavenly name I pray. Amen.
Amen. All right. Well, we have been on the path of doing hermeneutics, which is trying to take the Bible from its time and make it applicable to us today. And we've seen that there's two important things for us to do to accomplish that, is that we have to understand that there's a context, and there's two types of context. There's a historical context, and there is a literary context. And so we studied and we looked very hard last week or 2 weeks ago at the historical context, and we find out some very cool things about Philippi that helps us to kind of make these people come to life. Because it's important. You know, these people that we're looking at, they were real live people. And if we can understand their situation and what they're going through, man, it's the backstory, right? When you watch a movie, there's nothing worse than going like halfway into a movie and you missed all the character development, and then you're nudging the person next to you. Why is he hitting her? You should have. If you'd have known, that was his stepbrother's uncle's nephew, and he bit his dog, and I didn't know. Right, and that's why you don't understand why he's hitting. So for us, we understand that Philippi was a very wealthy city. It was filled with many people that were Roman soldiers. These are very proud people, very proud of their culture, of their heritage. It was a Roman colony, so it had extra special features and whatnot that, these people, there's a pretty good chance they're struggling with arrogance. Wasn't many Jews there, so, Yell, you want to come over here because you got to be able to see the board. So, and so, we talked about different cities it would be like, and it's a bigger city, and it's on, does anyone remember the main highway that runs right by it? Starts with an E. It sounds like a mathematical word. The Ignatian Way. Yeah, this is the main east-west thoroughfare that leads from way over this way, way over to the ocean. So this is like the hustling, bustling freeway that they're on. So this is a lot of commerce, a lot of wealth. Great place. As far as the climate, it's very temperate. So you can see there's a lot of people that have retired there, a lot of Roman soldiers. A big battle was fought there. A lot of Roman soldiers kind of like, you know what, I kind of like this place. I've killed me 10, 20 people. I think I'll settle here. So, so you get a feel of this place. It's big, it's arrogant. We talked, maybe it's kind of like a Dallas, Texas, or, New York. Draws a lot of people. There's a theater, a big amphitheater. There's the Roman games. They're playing there. And so we want to think about this because obviously when Paul's writing his letter, there's probably issues along this line that they're going to need to address. So we've got the historical context. Today, we're going to start working on the literary context. We have a huge problem. Yeah, it's maybe over there. Because we're going to have you practice your Greek here. Our huge problem is that Greek is not the everyday language that we're speaking, is it? And some things, not only is there an issue with the language, but like the things, the idioms they would have used and those kind of things, it's difficult for us to understand and comprehend. And so it means that if we're going to read an English Bible, thank you, we have to look at a translation. And a translation already means we're handicapped because we're trusting whoever translated the that they were trying to be thorough and accurate. Before we get into the whole science of translation, what translation do you generally use and why? We'll just go around the room. Amy, you want to start this?
No.
Nope. Okay. Yes, sir.
I usually read in the NIV.
NIV.
And the reason is because I've liked it for a while, and I've tried other ones, and usually once I've read the passage in the NIV and then I read it in another one, it's like, but I liked it better in the NIV.
Yeah.
So.
The speech flows better for you.
I find it pretty easy to understand
Cool.
the basic meaning.
All right. And are you an NIV person too?
No, I read the NLT
The-
because I think it's easier to understand.
We got friction
My
going
second
here.
choice would probably be the NLT.
Oh, okay. Okay. And would your second choice be the NIV?
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
Or the ESV.
All right. ESV. And for you too, you find it easier to read? Okay.
Yeah, NLT here too. Yeah.
All right.
Easier to read for me. Yeah.
Easier to read. Very good.
I use the NIV because that's the one that I was given, and it worked well for me so far.
And there you have it. Very good.
I do like some of the in the King James version. I
Mhm.
like some of the way that the speech is, because it's kind of like when you. It's different enough to make it almost exotic,
Oh, yeah.
but also you can understand it.
Well, and who doesn't like tender bowels of mercy? I mean, that just rolls off the tongue, you know?
It's very poetic.
And verily, verily, I say unto thee.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah.
I usually use the ESV for when I can't understand what they're trying to say. I read the NLT.
Okay.
And on the other side of the spectrum, I also read the NASB. Like I just kind of flip between the three.
Perfect. And this is a great thing, is that you realize sometimes you look at a translation, you're like, what are they trying to say? And to look at a different translation to try to get a little different viewpoint helps.
I use the NIV 84. I was given that to start with, and there was kind of a battle in our church of names over the NASB and that. But I do like the NASB because we sang a lot of songs from that.
Oh, yeah. Very cool. Are there a few other NASB people? All right.
I read it occasionally. Like there's this app I use on my phone. It's called Blue Letter Bible, and it has the interlinear thing. It
Yeah.
has the Greek and the English, and they just use the NASB by default because it's more literal to the Greek.
Yeah. I was in a bookstore and I picked up a New Testament, the American Standard from 1910 or 1901. And I like it. It's a little hard to read. It's kind of clunky, and we'll talk about why that is. But there's just something about some of the words, the way they use words, like ooh, it just kind of hits you. So that's neat. Is everyone else pretty much same translations, or anyone else RSV person or
Nathan only reads the word on the street.
what's that? Well, let me ask you this, as people who love Jesus and want to do what the Bible says, do you think it would be best that we translated word for word? Try to do our best to translate word for word.
No.
Sometimes.
No? Sometimes?
I
Yes.
think it's good to know what it is,
You think it's good to know what?
what the words typically mean.
Sure. On the surface, it really sounds like, man, I want to be as close to word for word as possible, because I want to understand. And so we're gonna play translators tonight, kind of wrestle through some of the issues of the science of translation. I didn't write down the verse. This is one of my favorite verses. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 13. It's a very powerful verse. Peter, after his introduction, he mentions the churches he's writing to, and then he goes on this beautiful rant about what we have in Christ. That we have this treasure kept in heaven for us that can never perish, spoil, or fade. It's protected in heaven by God's power. And he says, being honest, he says, there's this battle goes on that our faith is being tested, that God wants our faith purified, that our faith is more precious than gold. We refine gold by fire. Our faith is refined by fire. And he talks about how we have Jesus and the things we're learning, even the angels long to look into, and this salvation's incredible. And now we get to the first action. This is the first time he's going to call the people to action. When we speak in English, verbs take two forms. Verbs either expose information, or verbs exhort us to do something. We might see something or we might run. And so here's the first action. This is important on the basis of all this beautiful thing we have in God's grace. So this is something we want to really hey, got to pay attention. And here is the sentence. I will booger up my Greek. Dio anozezamanai tas osifas tis dianonos himon difontis telios elipizati epi tin pheromonin hymen sharin en apocalypsi lezo Christu. All right, let's go do this. So here is this is the sentence. Now here's the literal Greek. So let's read the literal Greek. Therefore, and I really should put an exclamation here. The force of this word, it's not like, well, okay, therefore do this. It's like, therefore, with everything I've just said, you've got to do this. I mean, very emphatic. Therefore, having girded up the loins of the mind of you, being sober-minded, fully set your hope upon the being brought to you grace in the revelation of Jesus Christ. If we wanted to be literal, and literally, this is as literal as you can get. What's the problem with going that literal?
Different grammatical structures.
Totally. In English, how do we form a sentence? We have the subject, then comes the verb, and we can have a lot of extra parts. And I get dangerous. I was joking about this with someone else. Grammar, like there's certain states I'm not allowed in because my grammar is it's bad. My son is an English teacher, and there's times he winces because he's like, I dangle participles all the time. I have no idea what I'm doing, but very basically in English, we have our subject first, and then there might be adjectives, adverbs, whatever, and then there's the action, the verb. Many, if not most other languages, it's the opposite. They have the action, then the subject, and such. So the structure, it's difficult. Here comes up something else. Okay, because here's our verb, having girded up. So see how the verb is coming first? Having girded up the loins of the mind. Okay, this is a serious call to action. This is a command. This is the Apostle Peter saying, you need to do this. Johnny, have you girded up the loins of your mind lately?
Well,
That's the problem, right? It's like, I got to do this, but what does it mean? And so I've got to go back, and it's just like we have all sorts of idioms. We use expressions today and words that weren't around 10 years ago. You know, if you said someone yeeted, would they know that 10 years ago? No. A meme? We know today they're popular, but 10 years ago?
I mean, in the right circles of behavioral psychology, yes, they would know what you're talking about, and it would be completely different from the modern usage.
Right. So okay, so we've got to go back. We're playing the role of translator. Let's say we're trying to put this into a language to try to teach people. So I've got to figure out what is having girded up the loins. What's girding loins mean? So now I got to go back to that culture. What would that have meant to them? Any ideas? Yeah.
Girding up your loins is where you would take your cloak and you would reach down and pull the back of it up and tuck it into your belt so that you could run. It's pretty fun if you've never done it before.
What's that?
So it's pretty fun if you've never done it before. Basically, it's turning your cloak into shorts.
Pretty much. It probably wouldn't be your cloak, because your cloak would be your outer garment.
Your robe.
It would be your robe, you know, your everyday. So imagine you're Peter, you're fisherman. Think when you think of Arabs today, when you think that culture today, they're not wearing jeans, right? What are they wearing? They're still wearing these long garments, which is great if you're just walking around shopping, whatever. But like if you're a fisherman or you're a carpenter, well, this is all in the way. It's going to get wet. I can't lift my knees. So you're wearing a belt, so you're going to take that garment and you're tucking it into your belt. That is girding your loins. You have now girded your loins. So we want to be the translator. Do we leave it in the word for word, maybe change the structure, but leave that phrase girding up the loins? Or do we explain what it is to the listener? Do we tell the listener, well, what it really means is prepare your mind for action? That's what the NIV does, right? If you look at the NIV, it'll say, prepare your mind for action. What do you guys think on that? Which should I leave it to the reader to figure out, or should I help them out by telling them what it means?
I personally have a preference for original with footnote as my personal reading style preference.
Yeah, I would agree.
Cool.
I feel like if you make something absurd like that, then you have to like research it, kind of thing. You have to dig into it.
Right, because otherwise I got to trust the translator. And we can think, well, this guy's got a doctoral degree, he's got this, and usually it's not one person. You know, like the NIV, the ESV, all these, they weren't written by one person. You know, there's a group of scholars get together and they hash out phrases and words, and I mean, it's a huge science behind all that. But what we're getting at is that you have to have a philosophy of your translating. And so one philosophy is to keep it as close to the original and hope your reader will figure it out, you know. So you have funky things like girding loins, or that tender bowels of mercy. We're like, what's a tender bowel of mercy? Well, think about it. Like when you feel something emotionally, where do you feel it? It's like your gut. You know, sometimes your gut churns. Well, okay. You know, you fall in love. You know, whatever. You get bad news. Your gut. So it's like for them, their thought was that your emotion was in your gut. And so to say tender bowels of mercy, it's like, oh, okay, that's, you know. So we could leave that and let people go, ew, oh, okay, I guess I'll figure it out. Or I do like the NIV, and I say, no, I'm going to help people out and tell them that this is a call to action. Prepare your mind for action. There's one other thing I could do. I could take and put this in a modern idiom. So what might be if I was telling someone to get ready to do something today, and I wanted to use a modern idiom, what might be a way I could do that?
Just do it.
Just do it. Have to have a little Nike swoosh. Yeah, we'll put a little Nike swoosh there.
You could tell them to steal their mind, maybe.
Steal their mind.
Ready up.
Ready up.
Maybe strapped up.
Yeah. Or how about roll up the sleeves of your mind? You know, more computer people, we might say boot up your mind. You get the idea. What we're trying to look, you're looking for something that people will go like, oh, I get that. He's saying get ready for action. Okay. So this is the battle the translators have. Now we've noticed already that like the sentence structure, the verbs here, and you know the subject is following. You know, he's going on to tell them to be sober-minded, fully set your hope upon the being brought to you grace. The subject there is that grace, Sharon. And so, you know, most of our translators, we flip it around in a way that's readable for us. That word, what's that word of there? Read that?
Apocalypse.
Yeah, apocalypse. What do you think of when you hear the word apocalypse?
Fire and/or monsters, depending on the movie.
Right? You hear apocalypse, it's never like a good thing, right? This is a great example of how things have dramatically changed. Do you know what that word apocalypse really means?
Revelation.
Yeah, revelation. Oh, that's right. We named a book that.
Yeah.
That's what the last book. It's the apocalypse. It's information being revealed.
You could call like anything that the prophets wrote down an apocalypse.
Yeah. In a couple hours, we're going to have an apocalypse of who won the mayoral election. You know? Some people, it will be an apocalypse. They'll be like, I don't know. It's the end of the world. I don't know. But here's the idea. It's like we have made it a huge word. We think of it as the end of times. We hear apocalypse and we start looking for 4 horsemen. You know? Oh, there's death and war and famine, and they're all coming on horseback. This Greek, it's a common word that means I'm just revealing information. And so I got to be careful of that, because I can carry my loaded ideas into a text and it's not loaded the same way. Do we have words today that are loaded words? All sorts of them. We have to be careful what we say, because some people will get offended, right? There'll be some Karen. Karen used to be a great name, right? I feel so sorry for women named Karen today, because it's like, what happened? Just because my name's Karen, now it's a epitaph almost? It's terrible. And so here's we got to be careful of things like that. So here's our basic things. If you look in your book on page 45, you will see a little chart. If you don't have your book, follow with someone next to you. And what you'll see is that there is on the left-hand side, they talk about what's literal. The Bibles that are, the translations that are close to literal. So you have like the King James, the New King James, and I hope you've read this book. If you've read this book, you know they don't like the King James, New King James. Why?
manuscripts and English that we don't use today.
Those are the two big issues. They're using manuscripts that came from Greek to Latin to English. They're older. They've had all sorts of errors in them. And so we want to go back to ones that are older and closer to the source. Yes?
New King James, or the Old King James, was that the one, the original Church of England?
Church of England was the original King James.
Yeah, yeah. And so that obviously was written with a certain, it wasn't written necessarily with God in mind in the same way that a lot of the translations we have today are from.
It was written with a holy fear of the king.
Yeah.
Can I give you an example? There's one word that they were like, oh, we can't translate this. If we translate this, you know what that word was?
King, right? Because they always say prince.
Baptizo. Why would they not translate the word baptizo? Very good question. The word baptizo, it means to dip, plunge, immerse. What form of baptism did the Church of English practice? Sprinkling. What's that?
The Roman Catholic.
Yeah, they did sprinkling on the head.
So they transliterated it.
That's the word. They transliterated it. Rather than say, hey, and Jesus was immersed in the Jordan. Jesus was plunged in the Jordan. That those who believed, Acts 2:30, those who believed were immersed in water that day. They said, oh, if we write that, the king is going to kill us. So they just took the Greek word baptizo and used it.
Baptized it.
Yeah. And so, and this is one of those things where you look at with you see the humanity come through in translations. And this is one of those areas that comes with the King James, where there's things like that where they're like, ooh, there's issues.
And now baptize is a English word that most people are familiar with, and modern translations still use it.
Right. But again, like if you were a translator, would you rather use this transliterated word, or would you want to be like, hey, this word means to immerse. It means to plunge.
Depends on if your client is the king or not.
And there you have it.
Well, and at the same time, you also have the modern audiences don't necessarily have any special connotation for someone being immersed in water other than that's weird.
Right.
So without using the word baptize, as they know this has ritual significance.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So that's a good example. So, you know, the king, I love, like King James, I love reading Psalms in the King James. It's got that flowy, beautiful, but as far as for studying, and then I always look at it as readability, because like it's important to me, I want to be able to study the Bible with people. If I'm using a translation that's written at like a 10th or 12th grade reading level, most people are, that's why I like the ESV. It's written at a 7th grade reading level. I don't know if you guys knew that. NIV is a 10th grade reading level. So if you're NIV, you're like, I'm using the one. Don't let it go to your head. That's right. It uses bigger words. So we want to stay away. Now, when you look at what's the translations that are closest to literal, the New American Standard, the RSV, ESV, they're pretty close. And what I recommend, and the authors do this too, when you're studying a book like Philippians, you should have like your everyday study Bible. Like, NIV, because you want to have that one that you memorize scriptures in, that it's like, hey, this is where I do my prayer meditation time, this is my study time. But when you're really tearing down a book, like we're doing with Philippians, you want to have several translations. Because every translation has its issues. And sometimes hearing it just a little different way will get your mind thinking just a little different and give you something to chew on. And so I really recommend the New I love the American Standard, okay? But the New American Standard, again, if you're not used to it, it's a little clunky, but it's much closer to what's being said here. So they will say, gird up the loins of your mind, which kind of puts you more in that framework of them back then. Your dynamic, or what they call functional equivalent, like the NIVs, they got a bunch here. I can't remember all the little letters, what they mean. The New Living Translation, the REB, the GNB, they're all kind of in that middle. And so those are like really good everyday reading Bibles. That is a good way to go. And then they have what they call their free translations, like the Living Bible, the Message. What you see with them is like the Living Bible and the Message was written by one person. And they definitely took a lot more liberty in trying to make it readable and trying to make it today. So if you were to look at this, and I wish I would have thought to bring like the Living Bible. I actually really enjoy the Living Bible. As far as for like studying a passage like this, man, it gets me thinking, which is what I want. I want to look at a passage and compare 2 or 3 or 4 translations to try to get the different feel that people are having about a translation. But this is what we go into when we're translating. Are all translations good? Are there still not struggles? Yes. I have some pet peeves with every translation. I think sometimes there's things that get kicked down the road, like that word baptizo. Most of them just say, we'll just keep baptism. Don't want to get into that argument. Just kick it down the road. If you have, well, let's look at I want to look at their example. Let's see what page that is. On page 37, if you have your books, they lay 4 translations next to each other. It's 1 Corinthians 7:36. And they lay out, this is just a great layout of the struggle with translating. So if you have your little book along, we're page 37, the very top. The New King James Version translates 1 Corinthians 7:36. If any man thinks he is behaving improperly towards his virgin. So just think that. Now this is a command. Paul is like, hey, listen to me. You need to pay attention. If a man thinks he is behaving improperly towards his virgin, what do you see as a problem with that sentence?
It's a little ambiguous.
As to what?
As to who the virgin is and what the improper behavior is.
Right. Is this father-daughter? Is this a man and his girlfriend? We don't know. It's very ambiguous. Okay.
What's the exact passage, though?
What's that?
What's the exact passage?
1 Corinthians 7:30.
All right, well, let's look at the New American Standard. If any man thinks he is acting unbecomingly towards his virgin daughter. What do you think about that translation? if any man thinks he is acting unbecomingly towards his virgin daughter.
Adds more information, but it also adds more questions.
And if you read in the rest of the passage, like with that translation, it kind of makes it not apply to us, because it's talking about a father letting his daughter be married or whatever.
Yeah.
And it kind of just, okay, well, I guess this doesn't apply to me.
Right. It would be that's a cultural thing where the father chooses who his daughter's going to marry. And so in this case, I guess, this is the dad deciding. But it's still weird that he is acting unbecomingly towards his virgin daughter. And it's like, what is the dad doing that's unbecomingly? That's uncomfortable. The NIV. If anyone is worried that he might not be acting honorably toward the virgin he is engaged to. Does that make more sense?
Yes, but it also changes the person
Mm-hmm.
from the father to the fiance.
Well, it's not saying a father anymore. It's only that one. It's a man. Here it's just if anyone. It's assuming it's a guy. That he might not be acting honorably.
Yes, but the one with the daughter is presumably a father.
Correct.
So that would be the father that Stephan's referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the New American is saying the guy must be a dad.
Yeah.
The New King James, you're like, it could be dad, fiance.
And the NIV is saying it's the fiance.
Yes.
So it's
Yeah. But to us, it would make more sense, right? The first two I gotta be careful, virgins and virgin. Sounds so much alike. And my speech is not so good anyhow. The first two versions, it's very clunky to try to read that and like, what? And it doesn't, to us, it's like, this doesn't make sense. And yet Paul is making a command here. The NEB, if a man has a partner in celibacy and feels that he is not behaving properly towards her, what's a partner in celibacy? I mean, I hope that there's a lot of people I'm practicing celibacy with, but what's this partnering in the celibacy?
yeah, that's interesting.
Here's a good example. It's a clunky phrase.
Yeah.
Maybe partner in celibacy meant something to the guy writing this. But
It sounds like earlier Paul refuted the idea of partners in celibacy, so.
Indeed. But, these are 4 translations, 4 very different readings, right? This is a good example why if I'm reading a passage, and especially if I'm reading a passage, I'm kind of wrestling with the meaning. I mean, quite honestly, 90-95% of passages, there's so much agreement, we're like, I get it. It's only 5 or 10% that we're going to be like, oh, what is that? Where it's going to be helpful, just to get different ideas. Now, I agree with the authors. I think the NIV makes the most sense. That, if a man is engaged to a woman, and I'm not one for long, long engagements. Yeah, it's just trouble. And that's what I think Paul is saying, especially because in Corinth there's a lot of strife going on, a lot of opposition that they're going through, and he's like, hey, this is hard. Yes.
Yeah, I think I was pretty happy to see that example in there, because I remember before Elena and I were married, and I was studying that verse because I was like, well, what is Paul talking about here? Because that's his whole passage about being not married. And
Yeah.
married.
And this applies to you.
Yeah. So obviously reading in the NIV, it's like, okay, this applies to me. And then I was reading the NASB, and I knew that the NASB was a more literal to the Greek version. So
Right.
So is the NIV just deciding that it can now apply to me. Should it not actually apply to me? And so like, I think they say in there that like they were using a manuscript that maybe had an error in it.
I think that there are several things, and this gets into beyond our discussion, but it's an interesting thing to look at, because a lot of people, they look at the Bible and they're like, well, it's been around for 2,000 years. No, it hasn't. What they had of like the Old Testament 2,000 years ago was parchments. And you may have had the parchment of Isaiah, and someone else might have had the parchment of the law. You would have had a bunch of scrolls and parchments, and not everyone had all of them. So you might borrow some from here. Paul talks about that, I think, to was it Titus, where he says, hey, bring the scrolls, bring the parchments. But that's what you would have. You didn't have one whole source. And then even if let's say you had all the parchments don't last long. You know, they're made of leather, papyrus. And so what do they have to be? Someone's got a hand, there's no photocopier, there's none. So a scribe, we call him a scribe, he would go read and write. And there's certain things you'll see, like they point out, one example, like the King James, or the guys like with your cattle and men. And it's like, that doesn't make no sense. And you see the word, there's like a Q, and it's like the difference between a Q and a G. You know, you flip the tail one way or the other, totally different word. But you can imagine, you take a book like Daniel, it's been translated or rescribed 60 times. Somewhere along the 60 times, one of those scribes is writing and gets distracted and then goes back and keeps writing, and there's that little blip. And so what we have today, we have about 5,000 pieces and parts, and you know, for the most part, there's a lot of agreement. And then where there's not agreement, there's a couple of things that we see as typical errors, and they talk about that. And good translators, they get that. And they also know the areas where the best scribes were. So if you know, there's some guys got a little loose on their scribing, and other guys were very precise. And so this is what they're looking at. They're taking these 5,000 pieces and they're editing, collating, trying to find where there's the most agreement, what makes the most sense as they're translating into what we have. There are still things that I struggle with. I will show you one. If you flip over to 1 Corinthians chapter 14. Show you as an example some of the struggles we still have. One of the struggles in translating from Greek to English is, in Greek, the word for man and husband is the same word. The word for woman and wife, it's the same word. The only way you can figure out whether he's talking about a woman or a wife or a man or a husband is context. So you try to see something in the context that says, okay, he's just talking about man. Or he's like, oh, okay, he's talking about a husband. So I want to show you a passage that has always just kind of been a little thorn in my side. In chapter 14, we'll start in verse 33. Who would like to read verses 33 through 35 for me? Not all at once, please. Whoa.
I can. Oh, go ahead.
Easy.
Sure. Which translation?
All right, do the NIV.
Okay, that's the one I don't have pulled up.
Okay, pull up a different one. Well, actually, actually it'd be intriguing. Bring up a different one.
Okay. I'll read it in the ESV.
Oh, that's what I'm doing.
For God is not a God of confusion, but of peace, as in all the churches of the saints. The women should keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, but should be in submission, as the law also says. Would you like me to keep reading?
Yeah, verse 35 is the key.
If there is anything they desire to learn, let them ask their husbands at home, for it is shameful for a woman to speak in church.
Any of you see a problem there?
That God's not a God of confusion, and this is a confusing passage.
Yeah. Thank you! You nailed it.
All women are supposed to be silent, but not all women are also wives that they have a husband to ask.
How do you know he's saying husbands? What tells you that this is a husband?
Because the woman owns them.
No. There's something in the passage that tells you he is talking about a husband wife.
At home.
At home. At home. This is a familial relationship. So the NIV, the ESV, they say, okay, well, I guess that means it's a husband. But then doesn't that mean that the woman that has to be a wife? To me, it's intellectually dishonest. And this is one of those things, kind of like the word baptizo. This is one of those things that's just carried through the centuries that like, well, the King James did it woman and husband, and they've just let it go. And I don't think that's right. If we're going to be intellectually honest.
So in my NIV,
Yes.
it has in the footnotes of this verse,
Yes.
peace, meaning, I guess the sentence before it, as in all the congregations of the Lord's people, women, and then I guess should not be allowed to speak, but should be in submission. It would be. So basically what it's saying is, in that footnote, is it's being a little bit more inclusive and to women, not necessarily, it kind of changes the context, so that if it's not just women that have to be quiet, but everybody, but women specifically, then maybe it's not just that they don't want women to talk.
Mm-hmm. So here we got to figure out what's the problem. And again, I got to go back, put myself in the church back then. You understand the church in Corinth does not look like New Life, right? We're not meeting in a building. There's not 300, 1,000 people meeting. We're meeting in little house churches. Like this. This would probably be a church. You know, this is the church of Nathan. This is his room, we're going to say. And we're all here. We're all here at his place. And and the other thing, too, is we recognize Corinth has got some problems. Nathan, your church here, it's got some problems, right? You got people that are coming early, and they're eating their food before other people come, and some of them are getting drunk because they're like, hey, I brought the good food. And I know when people are bringing that nasty casserole, no, I brought good burgers. I want to have my burgers, and because otherwise they're going to eat my burgers, and then I'm going to stuck eating their. No, I'm going to eat the good stuff. And there's some things going on with gifts of the Spirit, with speaking in tongues, that people are just going a little off, or a lot off. Paul's trying to reel them in a little bit. And so part of what he's talking here is that in the worship, there's this disorder. You know, Johnny decides he wants to sing a song, and then Amy decides, hey, I want to read a scripture here. Hello, and
I've never once volunteered to do that.
no. Well, but you're new to Nathan's church here. You will. You're like, oh man, yeah. And so there's just this chaos where it's like a bunch of little kids where everyone wants to, hey, I want to play my game. I want my game. No, let's play my game. And Paul's like, stop it. Okay? One at a time. Orderly. Okay, you get to do your song. Then you can do your scripture. And, okay, so they don't have a New Testament. So a lot, there's a need for prophecy. for someone to be able to talk about revelation. Not the four horsemen, but hey, what is God saying to us today? And he wants us to be orderly. And so what I'm seeing in my mind here is maybe as we're sitting in this room and, someone starts sharing a thought, is that, a wife is a guy sharing his thought and his wife's like, what are you saying? What are you saying? I don't understand. And Paul's kind of like, hey, you can ask your husband when you're back at home. Don't interrupt him when he's speaking in the middle of the thing. Wait, that makes sense to me. Whatever, as far as I can see. But whatever the case, if we're going to be honest, if he's referring to home, this is a husband-wife relationship. And to make it more general, I think, is dangerous and not correct. Thoughts or questions on that? Yes?
How often in that culture was a woman, let's say she lived by herself?
A woman in that culture would be very much like Eastern Asian cultures today. It's very family oriented. You answer to your father. It's like my gal Nadia from Afghanistan. We had this talk 2 weeks ago. She answers to her dad. She also answers to her older brother. Her oldest brother is equal to her dad. And I said, could you ever disagree with your older brother? She goes, oh no. He's wise. I need to listen to him. And that's the cultural, you are a member of your family, you will submit to the head of the household, to your older brother. When you get married, now you are submitting to your husband. But there's no idea that you're just kind of a free-range woman doing your own thing. Sorry. Yeah.
Was, I guess, a little different than yours with men being in other translations. There are men, I could see that being translated as male relative as well. If they're living in a house with their family, could be a father or brother.
Sure.
I mean, still there is the case of widows, but that would be a rare case rather than general.
Yeah.
Then I think in that family being next of kin for the most part, right?
I assume the widows would end up living with their family.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. If we were in more of a Jewish church, it would be all women on one side, all the men on the other. You have your husband and wife, you're over there, I'm over here. And, and that's very formal in that split. So this too is something we got to translate to our culture, right? Because our culture, we have a lot more liberality, we would say. But we want to be honest to what the Word is trying to speak and say. And so to make that from then to now, that can become a big struggle. Obviously, we see today the women's role in the church and all that is big. One of the interesting things is you'll see often with Paul is he'll say, hey, we have no other, like it says here, there's no other thing in the church. This is the way it is. And he'll often refer all the way back that this goes back to the beginning of time. This goes back to Adam and Eve, where God decreed this is the way it is. And that's where he takes his stand. So, but I want you to be aware of that. Because again, as we read, there's things we're going to read, and for us to comprehend, we got to see some of those differences. Another one that I would give you, just quickly, is, and this is another place where like the King James fails, or is a struggle, is in units of measure. So we see things like talents. When we think of talents today, what do we think?
Talent show.
Yeah. Oh, there's the guy who had 10 talents. Oh, that guy, I bet he could sing and dance, and he was probably really smart. You know? And then that poor guy, he only had one talent. He was so embarrassed he buried his talent. He didn't dance. He could dance, but he didn't dance. And it's like, no. A talent was a unit of money. Was a talent a lot of money? Yeah, absolutely. But we've taken that word talent and the meaning has changed. Because it used to have the term meant money, and it's changed to mean gift or ability. Yeah.
Was it the name of a unit of money?
Talent.
Yeah, was that just a type of money like we would
Like dollar bills.
Like dollar, euro, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. But it would be pesos, dollars, yen, denarii. And see, that's the one that really gets, I think, screwed up in the King James, because they translate denarii as a few pennies. And a denarii was a day's wage. And so to say it was a few pennies when it's actually a day's wage, it changes the meaning. And then sometimes the meaning just gets lost, because in some of the parables where Jesus is trying to say, hey, this guy owed someone a huge amount of money and the owner forgave him, but then this other guy owed him a few bucks. And it makes that difference not as vast. Yeah.
Maybe the writers were just trying to make a statement to their publisher. I'm not getting paid enough.
We need more Copens.
In my mind, with that sort of thing, you either have to almost go with the original word or liken it to something, because a few pennies may have been a day's wage back then, because it could have been a penny's meal for your family.
Right.
Now a penny is, you might not even constantly pick it up.
Inflation.
Yeah.
And if you said $5, 10 decades ago, that would be very different than $5 now.
I bet in Ed's time that you could buy a piece of gum for a penny back in the day.
Nickel gumball.
Wow,
You could-
bought so much.
10-cent Snickers.
You could buy a burger for a quarter. You go to McDonald's and then the burgers were bigger too.
Gallon of gas for 99 cents.
Right? Oh, I remember it was 50 cents.
They butchered
Yeah.
on the back.
I just want to say one reason why, like, for me personally, it's important to study this kind of stuff. I think for myself, one big reason is just that there's so many people today making random claims about stuff. They'll go and say, oh, this word actually means this. I'm going to go against all the translations that you and because those are all lying to you, and this is actually what the word means. And so just even just having the skills that, maybe you don't have all the answers when you hear something like that, but you're able to investigate it. I think for me that's a really valuable skill, because especially if you want to Google something about the Bible, you have to have that skill, because people are always making all kinds of claims about what the original text means.
Yeah, and sometimes they do it, and they, like they mentioned, the camel's gate. That, Jesus tells, hey, that's easier for how he said? Then yeah, and so some guys, and obviously he's saying, swallowing a gnat and the whole thing with the camel, and so they say, oh, there was a camel's gate. And the camel had it. And I've heard a sermon way back when I was young, a long time ago, where a guy used that illustration. And it's just a lie. Jesus is trying to say, this is darn near impossible, okay?
It's kind of difficult.
Right.
We can all be rich.
Needle
And
eyes were a little bit bigger back then.
Cameras might have been a little bit smaller.
Yeah, smaller cameras. But the thing is, and I appreciate what you're saying, because you're right. I sometimes you'll see guys that are pursuing a doctorate, and they have to come up with some nuance of some verb that Paul used in a new way that's revelatory, changes everything, and that's just stupid. It's like there's common sense. 90%, it's not hard to understand. It's hard to follow, right? This whole thing, we can figure out girding the loins of my mind, keeping my mind dedicated on Christ. Yeah, that's the hard thing. Figuring out, figuring this out and getting it to English, that's a little hard, but living it, being sober-minded, living it is where it gets hard. And so, but that's where I want to be.
And it doesn't have to be someone pursuing a doctorate. It can just be a random person on social media.
Well, see, yeah, and that's why I stay away from social media. 'Cause I have enough problems in life. I can't take all that. Okay, you guys have been awesome. I hope this has kind of been, I hope this has been an apocalypse for you. You can tell the pastors, oh man, we had an apocalypse on Tuesday. What we're going to do from here on out is we're going to start big picture of the Bible 2 weeks from now. I want to do just a huge overview, and then we're going to zoom in to the book of Philippians, and then we'll zoom into, paragraphs, sentence, little parts, and we'll go down to the minor, because I want you to see the whole picture. So I want to start with the big picture, and then we'll go down to little words. So I want to encourage you, now that you know there's different translations, and if you're like an NIV person, please go through Philippians now in like the New American Standard. And also get like a Living Bible or one of those free ones, so you've got on both ends. And read Philippians in both, just to get a feel of the differences and how passages are reading. All right? Question?
Do you read the next chapter in that book?
Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Johnny, would you close us with a word?
Sure. Dear Father, just thank you for this time that we all got to spend here, Lord. We just pray that this would be a blessing to our lives, Lord, and that this would just continue to help us grow in the tools that we need, Lord. Just pray that, just thank you for Ed Gunn and his devotion to the study of the Word and just his time that he put in for us, God. I just pray that you would just bless our weeks, Lord, as we move on throughout the week.
Amen. I appreciate it. I wish you guys, the guy who taught me was a guy named Tim Reedy. He was a bus driver for the city of Milwaukee. Guy was fluent in Hebrew. To have him teach a class, he was like, if you want me to teach, I have to have a 100-day lead time. And he would get up, no notes, and you would just be like, oh. When he wrote Isaiah, I got third-degree burns in the second row. It was just like, oh. But it was great. But, I mean, to have him teach, whew, awesome.